So I remember listening to this economist many years ago saying that as soon as you don't get any pleasure out of something, that you should quit and you should go into something else. And I remember thinking, do you know any humans? Like, do you understand what it's like to be a human being? We are very much always thinking about the negative of something, or how we can't do something, or that we can't go to some other place. And the reason is that we're evolutionary programmed to think in that kind of way. Every organism thinks in that kind of way, the ones that sort of think. And if you can imagine this, you're walking in the Serengeti and you see a lion, you should think pretty negatively about that lion. Most of the time, nothing happens, but you should be really programmed to think that, ooh, I might get hurt here. And there is this well-known phenomenon in psychology that bad is stronger than good. And the whole premise is that we're evolutionary programmed to think like that and to be like that. So I want to talk about that today in terms of positive thinking. I always try to encourage you to think positively because I know that myself, I am programmed. I am a real human being. I'm programmed to think awfully negative all the time. And my mind is always wandering in a very negative way and thinking about that I shouldn't be doing this, that I feel stupid, like all of that sort of real natural human stuff that we go through. And I'm sure you completely understand what I'm talking about. But, the thing is that we have a lot of biases, human biases. People call them biases, but I think it's just being human, right? Basically what I'm meaning is that if you were to sort of look at, how people are expected to behave, and that we should sort of execute things in a very rational behavior where we sort of do these calculations, these financial calculations in our head, and we sort of do things. I've never met a human being in my entire life that actually does this. I've been asking my students for years how they actually made their educational choice to go to university. It's only one or two that ever have actually made a financial calculation of how they made their decision to go to university. I think we need to sort of think about this, right? Like, how do people actually make decisions? So one of the well-known things that we know is that, there's two well-known things that we know. The first one is that we don't think about exponential functions very well. We don't think about how things explode over the long term in various different ways, right? So exponential functions, it's a really interesting phenomenon that you probably have heard about if, basically from 6th grade, 7th grade on in math, you might have seen some sort of form of exponential function that over time, what happens is you have compound interest. And that's how banks work, right? We have compound interest. That's how virtually every sort of dynamic process works in society. That's how reactors work, for example. It's all based on exponential functions. Everything in the world works on exponential functions. And yet when we make decisions, right? And the basic premise is that this year you'll grow by 10%. Next year you'll grow by 10% times 10%. The year after that is 10% by 10% by 10%. But everybody talks about you're just growing by 10%, right? Even with that language and how we do things, we think very linearly. We think that things go by step by step by step. And that is true. That's how we actually get things done. We go step by step by step. But the sort of linear function that we have, or the linear belief that we have, doesn't account for a lot of different dynamics that are happening in the real world. So for example, if you're doing something, it doesn't account for other people sort of following along or paying attention. It doesn't account for, you going along and then you reach some sort of weird tipping point, or you reach for plateaus, for example. There's all sorts of weird dynamics that happen that are just very difficult to account for. And we think very linearly. The whole scientific infrastructure, there's only a few people that actually think about the sort of complexity of the situation that we actually are in. Most people think that we have this very linear thing, that if you have so much of this, then we have so much of that. And for much of human life, we know that's not true. And because of that, we think linearly, right? Well, not because of the fact that we know it's not true, but we have this sort of linear world, and so we can't imagine things that explode or that grow very quickly or decay very quickly. We can't imagine those things. It's very hard to do. The other thing that we're really terrible at is, and there's all sorts of sort of scientific evidence or experimental evidence of this. If there's just a little delay in anything that you're doing, right? So you perform some sort of action, there's a little delay in it. It really messes it up and messes us up. We get all kind of squirrely about it, and we don't know what to do when there is that sort of delay. Most of the sort of reinforcement that we imagine happens is like we do something and and almost instantaneously there's some sort of thing that happens to it. Now imagine like you're a reactor, right? Like you're this nuclear reactor, you pull a rod out, and all of a sudden the temperature, goes up or goes down or whatever, right? And whatever is supposed to happen. That's what we sort of imagine to happen. But most things in real life actually don't behave like that, right? You pull that rod up and it might take an hour, it might take 2 hours for the temperature to change. And then in that meantime, when we're sort of waiting for something, we're kind of freaking out and we're doing all sorts of weird squirrely stuff, and we panic and we get anxious and all that kind of stuff. And some of us, and this is exactly what happened in the Chernobyl disaster, a nuclear reactor that exploded in Ukraine many years ago. They were just, pulling these, I think they were putting the rods in, I can't remember, whatever, right? Whatever direction it is. And they weren't expecting it to sort of reach this temperature so quickly, and they kept like putting rods in, seeing what the sort of boundaries were, and then it exploded. We do not understand. We're very bad at thinking about these sort of time delays between an action and an outcome, and we kind of freak out about that whenever there's something. So why do I actually think positively? Why do I get you to think about that? It's because we have all of these weird biases and we think in kind of weird ways, and we forget about how the world actually works. And the world actually works is we have this sort of exponential growth functions that happen. We have, we're evolutionary programmed to think about the negative because we're worried about the penalties. We have these behaviors and most things in life where we do something, we have to wait a long time to get the outcomes from it. Education is one of those things, right? You got to wait for a long time before something actually happens from that. And even then, who knows, right? You don't even know what's going to happen. So what I'm getting at is a lot of what we do in terms of what happens is we have this sort of weird anxious feelings and sort of, we kind of go squirrely, right? We panic about things, we're anxious, we don't know what to do, and so we are angry at everybody around us. And or we start doing weird things and get like kind of go in a weird path. So what I want to do and what I want you to think about is that if you realize all this stuff is going on in your head, right? And that's me, I'm thinking like that all the time. If you realize all this stuff is going on in the head, get yourself to think about it in a positive way. Or you think about like, hey, I can actually do this. I can accomplish a lot. I'm powerful. I've got a lot going on inside of me, but I just have to stay with it. I have to keep going. I have to not stop, given that the world is telling me otherwise and my mind is telling me otherwise, right? There's all this. My mind is telling me that, geez, I'm pathetic. I'm kind of a loser and all that kind of stuff. And that goes on in my head all the time. But if I just take those steps and I realize that, hey, this is going on. The world is, yes, the world is nasty and all that kind of stuff. And yes, I do realize that there are bad people in this world and all that kind of stuff. But, the way that you frame, the way that you think about the problem in your mind is often the what's going to happen as a result of what you're doing. There's this really good, I don't know if you've ever seen this guy or heard about him, Viktor Frankl, and he was a Holocaust survivor. And the idea behind it, he was, I believe, a psychologist, and he was sort of thinking like, how on earth does somebody survive the Holocaust and go through these concentration camps and still remain positive and still view the world? And you know, what his conclusion was is you have to think about it, think positively, think about how you can actually do a lot given this sort of craziness that goes on around us. And that's where I want you to think about this. I want you to think about, hey, I can actually do this. And I realize that if I just take one more step, a great deal is going to happen in my life that I couldn't imagine. And it's not going to happen like tomorrow, right? It never happens that way. But, you know, it might happen in 20 years. So somebody might watch this video. I might put this video up, for example. And somebody, I mean, the internet's persistent, right? It stays up there forever, right? And nobody watches this. Nobody watches this, right? But in 20 years, somebody watches this thing, and it's the son or the daughter of the president, and then the president or prime minister, or whatever country you're in, watches this thing, or they watch this thing, and then they take it to the prime minister and president, and then they say, hey, did you see this? This is actually a really good video. This is exactly what I've been talking about. And then they watch it, and all of a sudden I get called up by the prime minister or president, and you know, all of a sudden something changes, right? I want you to think about that, like how crazy this stuff is, and we can't predict any of it. The only thing that I know, the only solution I know, is to keep taking those steps forward, day in, day out, trying to push out all of that craziness out of my head. And the craziness that exists in this world, right? I'm very well of that. There are lots of crazy in this world. Just putting that stuff out and just going one more day, every single day. Keep doing it, no matter what. And I just keep pushing and just forget about the rest of the world. And that's it. That's the secret to deal with all this kind of stuff. And so it's why I think I want to encourage you to think positively in as many ways as you possibly can. And when you're starting to feel dumpy, hey, take that little walk, get back out, and see the world, and go back at it again. Just time in and time again. That's it. One more day.